Most people will never say this out loud. 3 winters ago, the last of my close friends died. That evening, I sat in my kitchen and waited to feel devastated. Instead, I felt quiet. Not the frightening kind. The deep, settled quiet of a house that finally belongs to itself. My name is Persinger. I am 86 years old, and I spent decades believing a large circle of friends was proof of a life well lived. Every greeting card I ever received told me so. What nobody told me, what I had to discover the hard way, is that almost no friends might be one of the most honest, most freeing things that can happen to a person after 65. Before anyone closes this video, I am not talking about loneliness. Loneliness is an ache. What I am describing is something different. A deliberate, chosen quietness. A life edited down to what is real. There is a world of difference between the two. Here is something nobody talks about. Friendship, the kind most people chase their whole lives, is one of the most socially expensive things a person can maintain. And after 65, very few people stop to ask whether they are paying that price willingly. How many people in your life genuinely know you? Not the version that shows up to dinners and laughs at the right moments, the real you. The one who goes quiet sometimes, the one who is tired of performing. Here is the truth that took me until my late 70s to understand. Most friendships we have held on to for decades are not really friendships, they are habits. Obligations dressed in warmth. Social contracts we signed at 25. And have been honoring out of loyalty to a version of ourselves that no longer exists. The moment you understand that, everything changes. Nobody talks about the maintenance cost of a large social circle, but it is real, and it compounds quietly. The phone calls you take out of duty, not desire. The gatherings you attend because declining feels like a verdict. The careful management of other people's feelings. The guilt when you go quiet for a month. The explanation required when you don't. Research in the journal Personal Relationships found that people over 65 who maintained friendships out of obligation showed measurably higher chronic stress than those with smaller self-selected circles. Not lower, higher. The very relationships we are told are keeping us healthy were quietly draining them. And then there is the most overlooked cost of all, what you cannot do when your calendar belongs to other people. In the morning you cannot sit with your own thoughts. The afternoon your body is asking for but someone else has claimed. Past 65 you know that time is not coming back. When you are young, you collect friends away, you collect credentials. The more the better. In your 40s, you begin quietly pruning, though you would never call it that. In your 50s, it accelerates, divorces, moves. The slow realization that some people you called friends were really just circumstances. Then somewhere past 65, something shifts. The pruning is no longer happening to you. You begin doing it yourself, deliberately, with a clarity you could not have had at 35. And the question arrives, quietly, in the early morning when no one is watching. Who do I actually choose? And who am I simply maintaining? Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If you kept only the relationships that left you feeling genuinely lighter, how many would remain? If you subtracted every obligation, every guilt-driven gathering, every relationship held together by history rather than honest affection, what would be left? If nobody could see how many friends you had, no social proof, no one counting the people at your table, Would you still work this hard to maintain it? Those questions have a way of answering themselves. And most people, if they are truly honest, find the answer quieter than they expected. I have known two kinds of people in my long life. The first kind spent their later years in constant motion, lunches, gatherings, committees, always expected somewhere, always performing for someone. From the outside, they seemed surrounded, blessed, people said. But privately, and I knew several well enough to hear the private version, they were exhausted. They had not had a morning to themselves in years. They no longer knew what they actually liked because they had spent so long being whoever the room needed them to be. The second kind had fewer people, sometimes just 2 or 3. You would not notice them at a party because they were rarely at parties. But when you sat with them, truly sat with them, you felt the rarity of someone who had become entirely, unhurriedly themselves. They were not lonely. They were distilled. A Stanford study on socio-emotional selectivity found that as people age, they naturally narrow their social circles, not from failure, but from the growing clarity of knowing exactly what they value. They were not giving up. They were waking up. I will tell you something I have never said quite this directly. For most of my adult life, I was socially ambitious. I believed the measure of a man was the warmth and breadth of his friendships, and I worked at it the way some people work in their careers. There was a man I had known since my 40s, good at conversation, sharp, entertaining. But he left every encounter having taken something I couldn't quite name. Not money, not favors, something quieter, some portion of my own certainty about myself. I would go home after seeing him and feel slightly less like who I was before I left. I kept that friendship for 30 years because ending it felt like a judgment. And then one afternoon, quite without drama, I decided I was done. I did not make an announcement. I simply stopped making myself available. And the silence that followed was not painful. It was clarifying. That was the first time I truly understood. Some of the peace we spend our entire lives searching for is not waiting somewhere else. It is waiting on the other side of an obligation we never had the courage to set down. The research has been quietly confirming this for years. A Michigan State University study found that friendship quality, not quantity, was the primary driver of well-being in older adults. People with 1 or 2 deeply honest friendships reported significantly higher life satisfaction than those with large but emotionally shallow networks. Research from the University of Rochester showed that people in obligatory relationships carried elevated cortisol levels. Their bodies registered those relationships as a mild but chronic source of stress. The body knows the difference between a friendship and a performance, even when the mind has forgotten. And, perhaps most striking, one of the strongest predictors of cognitive sharpness in old age was not social activity, but the quality of alone time. People who developed what researchers called positive solitude showed greater mental resilience, better emotional regulation, and higher levels of daily meaning than those who filled every hour with company. Solitude is not what we feared. For those who learn to inhabit it with intention, it may be one of the most generative things available to us in later life. We have spent our entire lives being told that friendship is measured in numbers. How many people would come to your birthday, your funeral, the difficult moments when things fell apart. But what if the better measure is something else entirely? One person who knows you without the performance. One conversation that leaves you more certain of who you are. That is worth more than a calendar full of lunches that slowly hollow you out. After 65, many of us can finally choose. The career no longer demands your social energy. The children are grown. The pressure to network, to belong, to maintain appearances, it has loosened its grip. And what fills the space, if you let it, is something unexpected, not emptiness, not loneliness. Something closer to a house with all the unnecessary furniture removed, spacious, quiet, entirely yours. Some of my best days now contain almost no one. A morning with tea and a window and the particular quality of early light that asks nothing of you. An afternoon in the garden where the only conversation is with whatever decides to land on the fence. An evening with a book and the comfortable knowledge that the phone will not ring with something you are expected to do. I have had extraordinary friendships in my life. There are people I've loved with the full weight of my years. 2 or 3 are still here. People who know me well enough that silence between us is not awkward, but simply the natural air we breathe together. That is enough. More than enough. The years I spent maintaining a crowded life because I believed crowded meant rich. I would give those years back if I could, not to be alone in them, but to be quiet in them, to be genuinely, unhurriedly present in my own life. So here is what I want to leave with you. A small circle is not a small life. A quiet life is not a lonely life. And the peace you feel when you stop maintaining what never truly belonged to you, that is not emptiness. That is what freedom feels like when it finally arrives. You do not become lonely by having fewer friends. You become yourself.